A very good evening and welcome to the Inside Show, of course, your favorite weekend magazine that focuses on current affairs and politics that steers big conversations. My name is Stephen George.
Of course, my name is Eugene Kwach, and tonight we have much for you in line. Of course, we also don't do this alone. We have two guests here with us tonight. And of course, our first guest is Agnes Gitau, who is the tax manager at Ronalds Africa. And of course, we also have Kevin Olianga, who is joining us here, a governance expert and the Secretary General for Conservative Roundtable. Well, indeed, welcome to this conversation. It is indeed a big conversation where we get to delve into the state of current affairs, matters the economy. And of course, as we talk about matters the economy, we talk about taxes, of course, the people also who are involved. And of course, we are going to look at the current tax regime. A lot of things that actually have been introduced in the same as we get to go on in the conversation. 244 is our SMS line. Of course, you can converse with us here. And of course, at Kwach Official, that is where you get us from. And thank you, of course, for joining us for this conversation. Let's begin this conversation right now. And let me begin with you, Agnes, because we understand that we had the 2024 finance bill. There's a lot of issues around it. There was quite much of controversy and debate on the 2024 finance bill. Of course, the president scrapped it off. Later on, we have had introductions of new bills in the 2024 finance bill. And of course, people are not quite understanding. Will you mind maybe telling us where we are in terms of you may be able to break down the changes, and of course, as you also tell us how it affects the average Kenyan's wallet, kindly.
Okay, thank you very much, Kwach, for having us on GBS today, and Stephen as well. It's quite an honor to join the panel. So yes, as you have said, we are just coming from a period where the finance bill of 2024 was rejected and was in fact scrapped off. But as we speak today, we do have another bill in line. It's called the Tax Amendment Bill, and this bill then comes to stand in place for the finance bill that was. So when we delve into the provisions of the bill, of the current bill, the amendment bill, what we'll be looking at is what taxes are these that have been introduced? Were they there in the finance bill of 2024 that was dropped? What is the reason why we still have to get another bill within the same year? Is it because the country is in dire need of finances, or is it something that is mandatory according to our constitution, or why is it that we have it here? So those are some of the issues we are going to look into depth, even as we move on into the show. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for that highlight. Maybe let's go now and break it a bit of what, because just this November,
yes,
there have been new introductions of some bills, actually.
Yes.
Maybe if you could elucidate a bit of them, because we have quite a number of them, those that are actually affecting the railways, and of course, there's those that are actually affecting health institutions.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe you could break them a bit down, and how they will then affect the Kenyans, the common Kenyans wallet, actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. We have actually had quite a number of bills, or a number of taxes and levies that
Yes.
are affecting the Kenyan, and to a large extent the employee, the Kenyan that receives a salary.
Yes.
So actually earlier in the year, at around March 2024, there was the housing levy, the Affordable Housing Levy Act, which introduced housing levy at 1.5% on the employees. And as we moved on into the year in October, we started the SHIF, the Social Health Insurance Fund, which came in place of the previous NHIF. So, and just as we started the SHIF, we now have this bill,
yes,
that proposes to introduce further taxes,
yes,
on the employee or on the Kenyan taxpayer.
Yes.
So as much as we are saying the bill seeks to introduce new taxes, there are also other good things that come with the bill.
Okay.
I'll probably touch on a few good things that the bill proposes to do.
Yes.
For example, to bring on board, yeah? For example, on employment taxes, the bill actually proposes to have a few incentives on the employee. For example, for meals benefit, for employers that provide meals to the employees, the benefit proposes to move from the current 4,000 per month to 5,000 per month, or 60,000 per year. And also for non-cash benefit, currently, which stands at 3,000 per month, the bill proposes to move the same to 5,000 per month,
Okay.
which means an employer can actually provide incentives for their employees, and these employees will not be taxed.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, to bring you in, Kevin, do you think these bills are sustainable to the public?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I think I'll start by mentioning what Mbadi has been insisting a lot, that it's a sustaining economic agenda, or what we call the bottom-up economic agenda and economic recovery. I think I'll want to call it a different name. I'll want to call it a salvation bill for the UDA brigade. Basically, they want to be able to salvage the elements that were good in the previous bill that was rejected or scrapped off, and probably bring other element. Now, when we are talking about sustainability, I'll give Mbadi a bit of a support in this. He has tried to broaden the tax base. We've seen the introduction of, or what you call repeal of DST to SEP, which is now in the digital space.
Right.
That has increased the contributors to the tax space, like now the courier, those who are providing like the Airbnb, right, which is in a form of real estate, they're not paying tax. It has also brought the element of even the international companies that are selling goods on a digital platform in Kenya, so that even them, they can be able to pay tax. All this increase of tax base is good because we've been concentrating tax on one segment of economy, which is the employee, the pie. And you know, that has been discouraging, because when you lose skilled labor in the country,
right,
you're also affecting the GDP output in terms of labor market, you get. So a lot of people have been discouraged to in the employment sector because of heavy tax.
So do you think them being discouraged, there's no enough public participations in these rooms?
Yes, so what I'm trying to suggest, but what Mbadi is trying to do is to increase the tax base, so that he's trying to say that, actually is insisting that in the next 24 months or 2 years from now,
right,
he can reduce the current roughly 35%, including the social tax, of course, the SHIF and the other element, housing levy, which is pushing the PAE tax up to around 35% of employee amount, or the salary. Is trying to say that in the next 24 months, this can come down to around 24% of somebody's salary. You get. So what is being done is to increase the tax base, which is a good thing, because he's calling it fair taxation. Let everybody pay their fair share of tax. We've also seen the introduction of, for example, the taxation on interest made from the bond market. Those who are trading in bond,
right,
will now
the
be paying
treasury
tax.
bonds.
Yes, they'll be paying tax, because these are wealthy people. These are high-end wealthy people who have not been paying tax. The same people are the people who are normally transfer their property to family trust, and by doing that they fail or they avoid paying tax. Now we are the government is going to tax the transfer or transfer of immovable properties. Can be land, can be any other immovable property, to family trust. It will be taxed going forward. So all this will bring more revenue, and again will reduce pressure on the employed people, who are the greatest victim on the repealed tax 2024. Yes.
Yes. Agnes, just on you again, because
yes,
there's a strong push for tax compliance. And actually, the question will be then, what actually are the strategies that are quite much effective in increasing the tax base without actually overburdening those who are already paying taxes?
Yes, and I agree with you, Kwacha. There's been a lot of work or motion towards increasing the tax base. And as we are saying, there feels to be a lot of quite high taxation on the employee.
Yes.
So maybe the question is, what else can be done to at least capture other people even in the informal sector? So the introduction of e-teams was actually a good move.
Yes.
And the current bill proposes to amend the Tax Procedures Act to include the definition of tax invoice to be an e-teams compliant invoice. So that is a move towards enlarging or increasing the tax base, increasing the taxpayers who will be submitting tax to the government, and that, if effectively done, will then lead to where an employee is not overburdened with taxes. And yet, the government still collects a fair share of their taxes from all taxpayers or most of the taxpayers in Kenya. Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. Kevin, let's talk about the economy itself, because we are experiencing the economy. It's projected to grow by like 5.1%. Now that is in Kenya, that is in 2024. And of course 5.5% in 2025. Now, how does these figures themselves, because even as you're talking about the projected growth in Kenya itself, it's actually great for us. It's imperative for us to actually compare ourselves with other African countries, and more so the East African community. So if we look at this projected growth, compare it to maybe our neighbors, what do you think, what does these figures actually portend?
I think Kwacha was here last year when I said that figures that are normally given as the economic growth for our country are false. They are economic growth in paper. We have negative growth. I normally continue insisting on that. I'm not economist, but I'll tell you, when there is the inflation rate is higher than economic growth, then basically you have a negative growth. So to me, I love one thing, the one aspect that Mbadi has tried to introduce. He has said and he has insisted that he's going to add an explainer, the expenditure explainer, to the 2024-2025 budget, where that they will be able to explain every shilling how they are spending it. He has also added that they are going to introduce what we call a zero-based budget, where you will not only tell for example, in any department of government, if you want to buy furniture, furniture will not be an item. You have to specify what furniture you're buying. Is it a chair? And what happened to the old one? So such kind of move will reduce what we call government wastage. Number two, I've insisted severally that we need to do audit of our employed workforce, because currently the largest expenditure that the government is incurring is what we call salaries to the government employees, which is nearly taking up to 50% of what we are collecting as tax. Now, what am I bringing all these issues on board? Currently, there is no fund for development that is available. So, meaning we cannot invest in new projects. We can, Ruto talked of irrigating 1 million hectares of land. That has not materialized in the last 2 years. So if we are not irrigating land, we cannot increase production of food. And therefore, we affect also what we call the end users, which are the factories. So we cannot be, the industrialization is also affected in a way. What am I trying to talk about? If you compare, for example, Kenya to Ethiopia, which now has overtaken us, Ethiopia has invested heavily on what we call productive economy. They have reduced expenditure on what we call a public wage bill, and they have moved money to agriculture. They have moved money to industrialization. So you find the economic growth of Ethiopia is between 9 to 11%. And it's a real growth because there is expenditure in key sector that bring growth. Ours is in paper because we are measuring output in service sector, which is not a direct translation to people's pocket.
Right, Agnes, to chime you in, the foreign direct investment plays a vital role in this economy. What do you think the president should do to broaden that tax base instead of going outside to Germany to go seek opportunities for the youths of this country?
Stephen, thank you for that question. And I think in Kenya, what ails us more is not the tax base or the taxes collected, because I feel like as a country there is a lot of tax collected from business persons, from employees, but then what is the accountability on these monies that are collected? What are the measures that are being taken to grow the economy of Kenya? And as he's saying, in comparison with other countries, in comparison with our neighbors, for example, the ITIMs that we are pushing to cover most of the taxpayers in Kenya, there's an equivalent ITIMs in Rwanda. But then you'd see when that tax is collected in Rwanda, you could see what the government is doing with the money collected from its taxpayers.
So accountability is a very key thing in Rwanda. We're not seeing it being
the same is not being implemented here in Kenya.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And let me just come to you, Agnes, again. Because you talked about several actually introductions of tax issues that actually have been introduced.
Yes.
And one of them that actually stands tall is on the Social Health Insurance Fund, and of course also on the housing levy that you guys had a bit alluded to. But so these two, which are quite critical, and of course we understand how controversial they have been.
Yeah.
Of course we understand how they have affected maybe even the employees generally. You could maybe tell to what effect, and perhaps does it even have financial benefit? Or even if not financial benefit, does it benefit the common mwananchi? And to what extent does it even benefit common mwananchi? Or does it just
Translate on paper alone?
Yes, and there is nothing nothing for it actually.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kwach. Yeah, as you've said, these taxes actually come to reduce the take-home on the payslip of an employee.
Yes.
Because the SHIF currently is at the rate of 2.75% of the gross income of a taxpayer. Housing levies at the rate of 1.5% on the gross income of a taxpayer as well.
Yes.
That's a percentage of 4%.
Yes.
So for a person earning 500,000, they are less 4% of 500,000,
Okay.
which is quite significant for an individual.
Yes.
It could be an amount that they pay their loan towards, for example, a SACCO or something. So when such deductions are made from your payslip, does it mean that this taxpayer, once they attend a hospital, they will receive high-end services from the hospital insurance fund that they have been contributing so much to? Does it mean at some point they're going to receive a house based on the 1.5 that they have been deducted every other month?
Okay.
Currently, it's not very clear which Kenyans are going to receive houses and at what criteria is going to be used to allocate these houses to the Kenyans. So as we are saying, accountability is really what the issue is.
Yes.
Kenyans would be happy taxpayers if they could see directly their contributions are being deducted at this point, but then in the end, these are the benefits that we get.
Okay.
So yes, I think that's a key issue.
Mr. Lienga, we've been having a lot of conversations here on tax this and tax that and this and that. But of course, something actually that you guys are mentioning and actually that we've talked about is what body or what this person has talked about that is yet to be implemented, that they want to implement. And we have known and understood that there's a lot of policies actually that have been introduced for years, and yet they have failed actually to even be implemented by the same government that has introduced and recommended the same. Going forward, what makes you think that CS Mbadi actually, being at the helm, will indeed ensure that this, as they are, as you're talking about them, is going to be implemented? Are we going to, are there maybe strategies that the government has put in place that can maybe, so that can we have confidence now in the government? What have they done actually that maybe will build confidence even as we wait?
I think to me is under Ndung'u, we saw a lot of interference or what I can call micromanagement from IMF and World Bank. So whether Ruto bringing in Mbadi is a shift from the IMF control kind of economic principle or economic governance to what we call now a local solution for a local problem is a question of wait and see. But I can see Honorable Mbadi being passionate, is articulate, and he wants to implement things he believes can change our economy. And I think it's only fair that we give him some level of trust in that and see how he can do that. Secondly, I also wanted to respond to what my sister said, just to add a bit of juice on it. You find that when Finance Act was repealed because of the Gen Z protests, we are seeing the same being implemented, being backdated. For example, currently, under the proposed bill, if it goes through Parliament and it passes, you'll find most of those proposals are backdated to 1st of July, meaning people will pay tax from July up to where we are today. So it's like the Finance Act was never repealed in the first place. And we are not saying it's a bad thing. Remember, we already have a budget hole of around 200 billion that KRA could not collect because of the repeal or because of the repeal of the Finance Act 2024. So at the end of the day, what my sister said and what I'm insisting on is that a lot of taxes are being collected. We welcome fully the introduction of other taxes that can increase tax base so that we don't over-concentrate on one segment of the economy. Three, I love when Bagdi said that the government is looking at shifting from what we call the income-based taxation system to expenditure-based taxation system.
Right.
And he has given an example of taxing use of taxi park, sorry, not taxi park, but what we call the game park and game reserve at 16%, because these people who are able to go to the game reserve or the game park have liquid money that they can be able to pay tax on, so that they reduce pressure on those fishmongers in the Lake Victoria who has to pay for them to go to the game park simply because it's subsidized by the government. So these are welcome move, but the elephant still remain in the room. When he talked about zero-based budget, will it be prudent enough to avoid what we call government wastage and rampant corruption? Two, when he talked about explainer on the expenditure, on how every shilling, and I'm happy my sisters give an example of Rwanda, that prudently explain every coin they spend. If that can be implemented in Kenya, then we have a lot of money to do development for our nation. Yes.
Interesting. Great insights here on The Insight. Remember, you can engage us online now. It is time for us to take a short commercial break. We'll be right back with more.
Your worst moment as an artist?
Sijui nilikuwa nafikiria. Nilimtext by the way. Sikujua ni yeye but nilitext.
Ulikuwa unamuongelelea?
Nilijua maybe ni customer amenitafuta. Hizi ni tissue.
Ni tissue.
Hizi ni tissue. Na udugulu. Watu mnatazama huu ni nani? Because by the way kuna hidden meaning. There is a hidden meaning. Hata ningekuuliza ungeniambia ni queen.
Queen wa wapi huyu?
Hii art ni Bairo black na blue. Ile nichukua 4 months kuimaliza. Ukiona hii tribe ametoboa mdomo, hii design ako kwa ndoa.
John Wan, what will you do if ungeshinda jackpot sai?
Kucheza na matope.
Today we are going to have the Scouts Corner.
Drop. Cheese. Let. Cheese. Let.
And I'm joined with 2 wonderful schools. Firstly, we have the Kings and Queens Academy. And we have the SEK St. Elizabeth Academy. Hi. We'll be having different segments. And the first segment, we'll have the Bible knowledge.
Now, Maureen's father works in a place where believers were first called Christians. The place is called?
The third segment will have the spelling bee.
We have 30 seconds to give your answer. Are you ready? Yes. Amazing.
NINTY 90. CHOCOLATE chocolate.
Meet us every day on Saturday, same place, same time.
Everywhere GBS.
Welcome back to The Insight. Of course, this conversation is here with you. And of course, thank you so much for joining us again. 21144 is our SMS line. Here we have our 2 guests here with us, Agnes Gitau, and of course, we also have Kevin Olianga. The conversation continues. State of the nation, economy, taxes, and the people. Agnes, as we continue this conversation, it's And us to talk about something else, which is, of course, the rising tax, the rising debt obligations, actually. It is something, it's a conversation that has also been quite controversial. Do we really have a debt as a people? What is our debt? And actually, even we have seen even the new CS say that they're trying to get to know exactly, to know the state of our debt. Who do we owe? How much do we owe them? And also, but even as we await all that, we understand that we are still and continuously lending. And he talked about Bretton Woods institutions, which he actually talked about them interfering. But even before we talk about their interference, as we continue to maybe borrow, from where you sit, how is this debt even affecting local businesses and even now affecting the life of the common mwananchi thus far, from where you sit?
Okay. So Eugene, on the issue of debt, that's actually quite an interesting topic in Kenya, because we seem to have quite a huge debt, and it's actually something historical.
Yes.
We've had this debt since the second president of Kenya. There has been issues or even court cases about debts and everything. But then, come to think of it, if you were to look at the budgets of the national budgets of the country, 80% of the budget collections is usually dependent on taxes collected. And then the debt then depends on the remaining 20%. So in a situation whereby Kenya has a continuously huge debt, you bet to wonder, is this the same 20% we were looking at, or are there more issues? And as we are saying, the lack of accountability has contributes too much to these issues, because when it's not very clear what our leaders are doing with the funds collected from Kenyans, then it's very possible for us to have debts that are never ending. They are being repaid over and over, but they do not seem to end.
And we were very wondering, Gitau, because we also have a depreciating shilling, the Kenyan shilling. And of course, this is also affecting even the debt that we, the debt burden actually.
Correct.
How is it even now, or rather how should even the government manage it, or if at all the government is doing anything, what exactly has the government put in place as a tax expert to ensure that it mitigates these challenges that actually we are facing?
Yeah, when you talk of the depreciating shilling, it's actually good to note that an overtaxed economy will only do worse.
Okay.
If more and more taxes are collected from the people, that economy will not grow.
Okay. So
as more taxes are being introduced into the Kenyan economy, the shilling can only depreciate further. But if there were measures whereby the taxes are fair and there's equity in the taxes that are being introduced, and the funds collected from such taxes are clearly accounted for, Kenya is one of the countries in Kenya that has very hardworking citizens, very smart and innovative citizens. So Kenyans have the potential to actually develop or to actually generate taxes that are enough to run our economy without having a certain sector being overtaxed, without having the economy being overtaxed, and even it actually creates a bit of confusion when every other year there are new taxes being brought into the economy, or there is a change on a tax that was introduced last year. For example, the digital service tax he was saying has now been is going to be replaced by the significant economic presence tax. So such very routine changes in a taxation system brings about confusion, and even for investors out there. Before I make a decision to go and invest into Kenya, I'm asking myself, I may come up with a strategic plan for 5 years, but how certain am I that within the first 2 years or by the third year, taxes are going to change and affect my strategy so much so that I cannot be able to keep going, or I cannot be able to achieve the strategic plan I had set in place.
Right. Well, I'd like to bring you in, Kevin. Do you think these economic planners are failing the president because they keep on stifling those policies that were being placed with former administrations, and we saw all those kind of policies work for the government of the day? Do you think they should be rethought again?
Yes. And as you answer to his question actually, because you mentioned the interference of Bretton Woods institutions, that is the IMF and the World Bank too, on that. we understand that they're part of the planners, the economic planners, because they're also part of the people who say, put these taxes and do this, and that is the interference we're talking about. Yeah. So do we have people who don't understand then what they're doing, or there is something else they're trying to do to maybe put our economy at a down? What do you think?
To me, is to respond to both questions. Number one, we've had a culture where if there is an incoming administration, remember government is always the same.
Yes.
Government, including even a chief in the village who probably did not vote for Ruto. Yes. I always say that, and we normally confuse the two. What Ruto runs is an administration. Previously, we had Uhuru administration. Now, to your question, for example, somebody is saying that every employee to contribute 1.5% of their gross pay for what we call housing levy. And this employee did not ask for a house. When Uhuru actually had proposed a different model where people were contributing money as a saving to Boma Yangu, so that in the end you can be given a location for a house where you can do what we call owner-occupiers. You stay in as you pay the mortgage. To me, all these things are about individual benefiting themselves and not benefiting the country. And that's why our debt cannot come down. If government was, and the Ruto administration was keen in making sure that they increase the number of houses in the country, and those who can get these houses, they can channel money to the SACCOs so that Kenyans can get cheaper mortgage at maybe 4 or 5%. Then they can do what you call owner-occupier, where now instead of paying rent, you occupy those houses, you pay at an interest of 4%. This money go back to the government at an interest of 4%. So they make money and at the same time scale what we call the houses in the country. Two, they can also do an equity release where they give cheap loan to employees to construct houses and pay back at an interest. So these are the best ways of giving Kenyans home. This other one they're trying to do is just somebody maybe want to sell their cement or maybe want to sell their steel and those things. Back to IMF and whether the governing principles is helping us, I'll tell you for free. Government and sovereignty of course of the country means that the incoming administration should be confident enough to have local solution for our local problems. Here we have a situation where somebody subscribe to international advice. People who are giving you advice are people who have not worked in this country, they have not stayed in this country, they are not paying tax in this country, they don't know the dynamics of this country. And you end up with what we ended up with in June this year, which is a Gen Z protest. So to me, let's have a local grown solution, the way Badi is trying to bring them on board, so that we see how we can broaden the tax base as we bring in the prudent use of funds, and of course trying to reduce the rampant corruption. If you can allow me a minute or so, I'll suggest some solution that can also help the administration to be able to have effective management of the economy. For example, since Kibaki time, minimum wage has not grown on a yearly basis. Well, I think it's still at around 16,000, which was during, I think, Uhuru's first term or Kibaki's time. I remember Honorable Nyami was trying to move it to 22,000 shilling. That is still very little. I think the first thing they can do to be able to help youth of this country is to increase the wage, what we call the minimum wage, to 28,500, tax allowable without tax. This will give the young people money to spend and increase the purchasing power. Yes. When you increase the purchasing power, you are able to collect the same in tax in form of VAT and excise duty on goods and services that these youth are going to buy. Secondly, there are things that they're avoiding, which they should do, like yesterday. One is vehicle tax. I saw Honorable Mbadi was unable to answer that question, whether he's going to tax vehicle or not. This is a good move. We should not be congesting our road with vehicles when even it has a negative impact on our environment. So I fully support taxation on vehicle because that will reduce the pressure in our road and of course in our environment. But the administration should also come with solution, like the one that has been done by Ethiopia on Addis Ababa, the light rail, you get. Finally on the same, everybody should pay tax. I heard a certain preacher saying that their work is to pray for the nation and not to contribute to tax.
Okay.
I'm telling you, churches are now doing business with the sadaka that they are receiving.
Yes.
They are exploiting Kenyans, and they are becoming billionaires at expense of poor Kenyans. True churches should be able to build institutions like sport facility, a computer training facility, or a cheap hospital for their members of the church.
Right.
But in Kenya, it's not being done. So if they're not doing those things, let tax them, not mainly to go to treasury, but the amount they are not using to develop their members, they can take it maybe to sport fund,
Right.
where we can build those study at the Ruto ones.
Right. Agnes, Kevin has spoken about Ruto subscribing to the international advices. Now that we have a new administration that is from the Biden administration to the Trump system of governance, do you think those policies are going to change? Because things like toll roads from Mombasa, from Nairobi to Mombasa had been introduced in the expense of the taxpayers' money, and America had signed some policies with Kenya. Do you think there are going to be effects?
Yes, definitely we are going to have some effects in Kenya in light of the change of administration in the US.
Right.
Considering that to a huge extent there are those relationships that Kenya has with the US. So I think what is more important is the effect those relationships are going to have on the Kenyan economy.
Right.
And especially in light of our forex exchange, and how the same is going to now roll over to the economy and the businesses that the Kenyans run on a daily basis. So we are actually hoping that the policies and measures that are going to be picked up with this new administration and the relationship with it and Kenya are
Right.
going to be more favorable, and actually to even some extent reduce or rather put in measures that are going to reduce or govern overtaxing of the Kenyan
The
economy.
current ambassador has been very instrumental in governance in this country.
Yes.
And remember during the foreign trip with Ruto, she was tagged along, and many Kenyans are calling for her to be recalled back to Washington. Most of this development she had begun, like we saw AGOA, she spoke in some of these places that had African heads. Are they going to be thwarted down?
That is now something we wait to see and find out.
Right.
And as we've just talked about it before, change of these tax laws and policies very often, like if these policies are going to be put in place and then after a short time the same is changed, has a ripple effect on
Right.
the economy and on the businesses and the taxation even of countries. So I'd look for a way forward probably in the future whereby countries, and even from a global perspective, can come up with measures to probably put in place that if a law is set, can it at least run for the next 5 years? So that even for the policymakers and the law setters, they take it seriously. By the time they bring on a tax law
Right.
or a policy on board, they have weighted it, they have checked the implications the same has, and they are sure that in the next 5 years it can only be a positive change for the economy.
Or something projecting towards Vision 2030, the way
Yes.
it had been rolled years ago.
Okay.
Yes, that was also actually a very good dream or a very good strategy, because that is something that covered a projected timeline, so that even for decision makers, for investors, for the normal taxpayers, you ideally have an idea of where you're headed to.
Right.
You're not in this position and in the next few years,
You
in the
keep
next 1 year,
meandering
you
around.
have been pushed in another corner.
Right.
Yes.
So let me just ask you, Agnes, before we
Yes.
come to you. I know that we'll be getting into the US election and actually how it will affect the economy going forward. But just on you a bit, Agnes, because you're a tax expert, what actually tax reforms? You've talked about one.
Yes.
And one of them is actually, as you said, there should be a law to guide how those policies come about. But apart from that, what else do we actually need so that, because the people who actually want the businesses to be protected from this tax, the people who actually, apart from those who are doing businesses, the investors and all those kinds, so that we protect also the common mwananchi, what other tax policies and reforms
Yes.
do we need in the country to propel the economy even forward better?
I think another key measure that we can pick up as a country that can help us govern these challenges that we are having would be appointing technocrats into these positions. For example, positions for CSs in Kenya, those should be positions for professionals, people who have experience in the specific fields that they are standing in or that they are leading. But unfortunately, in the current regime or in the recent regimes that we've had, you find that these positions or these seats have been politicized, whereby maybe it's probably a reward because you supported me during the elections or anything. And now when you put me in a CS position and I am not a professional in that field, I cannot see 5 years from now what the decisions that I make today will lead to or what effects that has on the economy. Then that's why we are having these challenges. That's why we are finding ourselves in a position whereby a law is made today, after 1 year they realize this is not working, so we need to change, because nobody bears the vision. Nobody can see far ahead enough to be able to decide a decision today that can be carried on in the near future or in the next reasonable future to stand or to be strategic enough or firm enough for a business to rely on or a taxpayer to rely on.
Interesting.
Yes.
Evan, I know you like, apart from geopolitics, and there's a lot of things you love. This is a topic you love so much. The recent US election saw Donald Trump actually triumph. But of course, it's not just an election. It means a lot. It portends a lot to countries like Kenya. And maybe from where you sit, what does it mean? What does Trump's, or rather shift in a regime, because Kamala was part of the other regime, what is now a shift in the regime mean and even portend to Kenya's economy from where you sit?
First, however how little my voice is, I must congratulate President Trump for a comeback to White House. It has never been done in the history of United States. I think that was a great achievement.
It's been done once?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But that was long. I'm saying in modern history.
Okay.
Yeah, it has not been done, and that is achievement for him. Secondly, I must state that a Ruto regime or Ruto administration has failed terribly in the foreign affairs segment of his administration. Reason being is Kenya, since independence, has run his affair on what we call non-alignment, meaning we don't officially align to the West or we don't officially align to the East. We always approach our issues of international affair on what we call a bipartisan approach, or what we call multilateral or bilateral trade relation. And Ruto decision to put Kenya as a non-NATO ally designate was a dangerous move. It has isolated Kenya. Today as we speak, there was a BRIC meeting in Kazan. Kenya was not given a seat on the table, simply because now those guys who formed BRICS, that is now the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, wanted to reform NATO. They also wanted to reform what we call the organization like UN. And now they see Kenya as part of NATO, being designated as non-NATO ally. So you cannot be invited in a table where you are seen as an enemy or a support of an enemy. So I think it has put us in a precarious condition. Two, on the economic front, you find that as we speak, when China is sending their person maybe to Kenya for any trade relation, they send the undersecretary. Before that, they were sending what we call senior officials of the government. For example, foreign affairs minister or senior person in the government to attend those meetings. Meaning the interest in Kenya economy and the interest in Kenya as a trade partner with the likes of China is diminishing. Trump election. Much that we will see there is, I expect the ambassador to be recalled, the way Kenyans are demanding one. Democrat failed terribly in instigating unnecessary wars everywhere, and seriously interfering in other sovereign countries' affairs, like they interfered in Kenya election. I don't want to go to much detail. I think it's in record, and this story will prove me right. But Trump, on the other side, has been known to focus mainly on America first,
Okay.
and to focus on trade and not political interference
Okay.
or economic interference.
Yes.
Right.
So we might see a situation where we might have our own local government planning and implementing policies that are locally made,
Yes.
and not interference from from Washington DC or from Brussels.
Okay.
Right, Agnes, women around the world were expecting for a woman president, Kamala Harris, and she really failed massively in some of these swing states and the popular vote. Women being on the cups of making history around the world, do you think it won't translate in Kenya? Are we not ready for a woman's kind of leadership here?
Thank you, Stephen, for that question. And I think the US is now feeling what we as Kenyans felt
Right.
just before our elections, yeah? Where the people who are supporting Baba, quote unquote,
Yes.
there was quite a massive move for people who now wanted to vote for Baba because he had a female vice president, yeah?
Right.
And we saw a lot of applause or applauding in the US when Kamala was actually elected as the vice president for Joe Biden.
Historically.
Yes. So, but I would also say that the elections were quite tight, and especially comparing that Trump was, I would say, way more experienced because he has been president before. He has been in these elections many more times than Kamala. Remember, Kamala came into
3
the
months.
most light when she was elected VP. Before she was an AG, but not so much politically. But then what does that say for the future?
Right.
What are we looking at in the next elections? Does it mean she now has a higher chance
Of course.
of now being elected president? Does it mean that now women still now have a better chance, or they have a better chance of believing in themselves and taking the chance? Because sometimes there could be an opportunity, but then there is nobody to take up the challenge. So in future, I think we look at more opportunities or more women coming into play and giving their shots at it.
Recently, a deputy president was appointed by the president. Many people are hoping that Anne Waiguru was going to be appointed. So we still have a long way to go, right?
I would not say a very long way. I'd say actually there are signs that in the near future,
Right.
just like Tanzania, we might have a female president.
Right.
Yes.
Watch.
Interesting. Well, let me also digress a bit, but of course not just far from what you're talking about.
Yes.
Because still on the US, because we understand US's influence, regardless, even when we say that the President Trump is known to be a person who doesn't love to interfere a lot. And now based on that, based on US foreign policy actually, maybe if it changes, how will it even affect on Kenya's economy? Bearing that Kenya, actually, as we know it, relies a lot on multilateral institutions, and that is like the World Bank and IMF. Are we going to see or experience where Kenya is now going to be non-aligned and then seek other people maybe who can be able now to fund us? Is that what we're going to experience? Or?
I think to your question, if Kenya want to succeed in gaining from what you call international community, then we should probably review the decision of being a designated non-NATO ally.
Okay.
Because now, I remember there was a time, sometimes our president applied double standard. He was busy insisting that we need to reform institutions like IMF and World Bank,
Yes.
and the UN, which are undemocratic and being overrun or being over-controlled by one country.
Yes.
You can't do that while being the ally.
Yes.
You have to do that standing neutral in a place where you can say, together as Africa, we want these changes. I don't see us benefiting much from US policy, mainly because as long as this institution remain undemocratic, then we will not gain anything. I'll give you an example of what things I'm talking about. For example, the total population of Africa combined is nearly 1.3 billion, with around 54 countries. Yet we don't even have a permanent membership in UN Security Council. When a country like France, with less than 300 million people, has a permanent, what you call presidents in the UN Security Council. These things are alarming and they are bringing a lot of questions. Secondly, you are talking about IMF. For Kenya to borrow money from IMF, we cannot borrow directly. We have to talk to what we call a European nation or maybe US to borrow on our behalf. And normally they add like 4% cap on that money they're borrowing on our behalf. So if such lending practices are left like that, then countries like Africa will not see a daylight. So I support the proposal by African Union that African Union should be designated a member of UN Security Council. 2, I support what we call a negotiated bilateral trade arrangement that include either a bloc like East Africa or Africa as a whole. Remember, I'll give you an example. Ruto signed a trade agreement with the European Union, while at the same time East Africa Community is negotiating another trade agreement with the same European Union.
Yes.
So basically, what we call bypass the East Africa negotiation, and that was detrimental because what we signed is inferior to what East Africa Community is negotiating when we are supposed to be part of the same East Africa Community. On the same side, I heard you talk about our budget being unbearable. Remember, as we speak, the international community has given us what we call the global rating B-, meaning getting investors, what we call foreign direct investment, or getting even loans from international community will become a problem in future. Remember, our debt to GDP is now at 68. That is the official figure. We are told there is some hidden debt that we took that are not part of that percentage, meaning it can be 72-75%. East Africa Community ceiling is 55%. So by saying we are no longer even a member of East Africa Community by that virtue. So to us, let us reduce our debt ceiling. 2, let us increase trade with East Africa Community members. You get, we are busy signing bilateral agreements with the European Union and with the US market, forgetting that we are losing what we call the trade balance between us and Uganda, losing trade balance between us and Tanzania.
And Uganda is one of the major...
Yes. For example, we used to export what we call pharmaceutical and other what we call finished product to Uganda. And our trade balance was superior compared to Uganda. Now that is reducing. Very soon it will be a negative trade balance where Uganda will be gaining more than us. Why? Because we are not focusing on local trade with our partner within East Africa Community, within IGAD, and within Africa itself. So I think we should focus on that. 2, we should negotiate through the blocks, like now the East African IGAD, COMESA, and Africa Union. To me, that will add us more value than being isolated. Currently, we are the only country in Africa that has been designated a NATO ally. That has isolated us further from our African partners, because they see us as betrayers.
Agnes, we've come actually to the end of this conversation, and given the various tax reforms actually that we have discussed, some that we have not actually, that you have actually alluded to, maybe digital taxation, there's also a turnover tax, I also get to understand. Of course, the new deductions generally. Maybe from your perspective as a tax expert, what advice will you then give to SMEs and of course also MSMEs? Because we understand that they are quite a consequential sect in our economy generally, on how they have actually impacted on our economy in terms of the employment and so on. What advice?
Okay, and maybe Eugene, just before I go to the advice, I'd like to add on what Kevin has said about Kenya isolating itself. In this bill, we actually see a proposal to introduce minimum top-up tax. So minimum top-up tax ideally will affect multinational corporations. That is an entity that operates in Kenya and beyond. So ideally, the minimum top-up tax will proposes that a tax, effective tax rate of 15% be paid by every multinational, regardless of whether they are making profit or losses in Kenya. So that is a measure that can actually also have an effect in our economy, and especially for investors, people who are looking into bringing their business into Kenya. Those are some of the key considerations they'll have to look into. and especially for the big entities, the multinational entities who would be seeking to invest in Africa and beyond. So in addition to the antenatal policies that Kenya has now signed into, even the taxes we're introducing, are they in our favor? Are they putting Kenya as the haven where investors will run into to invest? And you know, when investors come, it means more jobs for our Kenyan citizens. It means technological advancements because they'll bring in more technology and new things. And also this issue of significant present tax, whereby even for a company that is non-resident, it's not existent in Kenya, and it has a digital marketplace that are being used by Kenyans. Does these taxes, I know there's the need to collect tax from such entities, but these taxes, do they have a more positive impact for our country, or are they leaning towards the negative side? And now on about the advice to SMEs. So for SMEs, I'd encourage any business owner, any taxpayer, to be adept with the tax laws. As we have mentioned, there has been quite a lot of changes. Year in, year out, we are having a new tax or a change in the rates or a change in the methodologies which tax should be paid. I would advise them to keep themselves abreast with these changes, and even more advice, seek the services or professional guidance of tax experts in the country, so that you do not find yourself in a situation whereby your business has been covered by so much taxes or so much penalties and interests that has come up as a result of non-compliance with the tax laws. Yes.
Right. Interesting insights here.
Before, we could just give him a bit of a second, but also to give his part, and then as we also...
I think to me is we've said a lot in terms of governance and issue of the best tax laws that can be able to diversify our tax collection and also bring a bit of stability to our tax laws. My addition to that is there is a segment of the economy that is not taxed at all because we don't have data base of those people. Secondly, because we've not simplified tax for them. I think my suggestion to the administration is that let's come up with a flat rate taxation for micro economic segment of our economy. For example, there are people who have this, what we call vendors of Mama Mboga and everything, who are doing well and they're making money, more than 200,000 income per month. But they're not paying tax because it is not simplified for them. If, for example, we can come up with an incentive, come up with probably even a different type of PIN that classify them as micro segment so that they pay tax and in return they get certain benefit so that they can also contribute to the nation building. Another segment is the low segment of SME that is also not paying tax because of the, I'm grateful to my sister is telling Kenyans to be adept to the new changes. There are those people who don't even know where to start. Because he is the company and he's the only employee and he's the only business person in that company. So it becomes difficult for them to be able to implement the tax measures that are being brought about. So if we can come up with a flat rate for the lower segment of SME, again, it will help our administration. Finally, as we move on, I think there is the element of also trying to do well in the international front, stopping the isolation that we are doing, because we are now not at par with our peers in East Africa community. We are not in tandem with African Union, and these things are affecting us internationally.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Interesting insights here. Now, it is time for us to go for the editorial, shall we? Hello, you can begin the editorial from the top. Kenya is massively known for its historic events and rulings across the democratic terrains of Africa and the world. Well, leadership is a calling and everyone's voice matters. In retrospect, with the political lineups and party politics has drawn and cleaned by watchdogs, indeed gleans Kenya as a democratic cradle for the universe. A canvas of seismic progress that wields power the time it was needed the most. The 2010 Constitution is the equalizer of poor leadership and governance. President William Ruto has an uphill task to make every elective leader is super accountable. Remember that sword and oath he took, it was quite important for every citizen. Any leader who casts aspersions that would polarize people absolutely has no good intention, but lead us to paths that will stoke violence. And now that is our editorial tonight. My name is Stephen George.
And of course, thank you so much for joining us on The Inside Tonight. Every Friday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. you get to join us here on GBS TV as we get to elucidate greatly and deeply, get to chew these policies into what you, our viewer, can indeed get a grasp of. And of course, tonight was a great day when we talked about the state of the nation, looking deeply into a number of issues, and of course on matters tax, where we were looking at front and center on these very critical issues. We talked about quite a number of issues which I believe that, of course, has been of help and of substance to you, of course. And on behalf of everyone who has made this possible, we wish you a very good night. And of course, keep talking to us. You can get me at Kwacha Official at Tudabonda before. That is where you get to converse with us on GBS TV. And of course, this is GBS TV, and this is The Insight. My name is Eugene Ochieng Kwach.